Thank you so much for your service, and we love you, and we'll continue to support you in this journey. So with that, I'm going to begin my message. So I'm going to try my best to stick to the script so that people in the back don't get upset at me because we have a translation. This is not translated, so please, I'll try to follow along, and I'll try to make it as fast as possible so that our young people don't get bored. So as we celebrate 33rd birthday of our church, I must give thanks to God for His faithfulness over the years, as He is the one who led this church from day one until now. Also, I want to thank and recognize those who invested so much into this church with much prayer, sweat, and tears. I proudly say this every year, and I said this in the first service, because there are a lot of people there who served. We're standing on the sacrifice and the legacy of many heroes, and these heroes are all here. I thought about the significant life events of Jesus when He was 33, since our church is also turning 33. The Bible tells us Jesus started His earthly ministry when He was about what? 30. And ministered for about 3 years. And if you do the math, Jesus was probably 33 when He died on the cross, when He was resurrected, and ascended into heaven. And of course, I'm not suggesting that we get crucified or we go through resurrection. Jesus already accomplished that. But I think there's an important lesson we can learn from the ascension and the events leading up to it. And here's what I mean by that. Before Jesus ascended into heaven, He spent His last moments, about 40 days, with His disciples. This was an intentional time of preparation for the transition that will come. And as you know, the Church of Jesus Christ will be birthed on the day of Pentecost, and the lives of these disciples would never be the same again. The apostles became the pillars of the early church, and they went on to prepare their own disciples for the transitions to come. And as a result, the Church of Jesus Christ is still standing strong today after many years of transitions, and for that, we praise God. So I asked myself this question: how is our church preparing for the future today? Again, how is our church preparing for the future today? Are we getting our people ready for the transition? I'm not saying the future of the church depends on our plans and what we do or don't do. However, the scripture clearly states that this is our calling and duty and responsibility. As we'll see from the passages today, God commands His people to remember this calling as the first importance. If it was a priority for Jesus on His last days on earth to prepare His disciples for the future, I believe we need to also give proper attention to this matter, because the future of the church may be at stake. So let's look at two different passages today. And I'll be reading from NIRV. It might sound a little bit different than the passage that you're used to. And I do that because I know our elementary school students, that's the version they use. So I wanted to make sure they also understand the passage today. So I'll just read it for us, follow along on the screen. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 to 9 says this: Israel, listen to me. The Lord is our God. The Lord is the one and only God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul. Love Him with all your strength. The commandments I give you today must be in your hearts. And make sure your children learn them. Talk about them when you're at home. Talk about them when you walk along the road. Speak about them when you go to bed. And speak about them when you get up. Write them down and tie them on your hands as a reminder. Also tie them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses. Also write them on your gates. Another passage that I want to turn to is Psalms chapter 78, verses 1 through 7. It says, "My people, listen to my teaching. Pay attention to what I say. I'll open my mouth and tell a story. I'll speak about things that were hidden. They happened long time ago. We have heard about them and we know them. Our people who lived before us have told us about them. And we won't hide them from our children. We will tell them to those who live after us. We will tell them what the Lord has done that is worthy of praise. We'll talk about His power and the wonderful things He has done. He gave laws to the people of Jacob. He gave Israel their law. He commanded our people who lived before us to teach His laws to their children. Then those born later would know His laws. Even their children yet to come would know them, and they in turn would tell their children. Then they would put their trust in God. They would not forget what He had done. They would obey His commands." Today, as you look around, we have about 5 to 6 generations in this very worship room. From the boomer generation to Generation Alpha. I'm so thankful that the children, the teens, and the young adults, parents and grandparents can gather to worship together. I cherish these moments because even my family, we rarely get to worship in the same space. But however, the reality is that one worship service every year is insufficient to prepare for the future of the church. It's not enough. A church like ours also has additional challenges like language and cultural barriers that we need to work through. That's why I believe our approach must be more prayerful, strategic, and intentional as we strive to learn and find ways to fulfill God's calling to prepare the church for the future. Thankfully, there has been much research and discussion on this matter. How to prepare the church for the future. It's done by many scholars, pastors for decades, if not more. As a result, they strongly recommend, and listen to this carefully, they strongly recommend that churches shift from a multi-generational church to an intergenerational church. And you may ask, what's the difference between multi-generational church and an intergenerational church? And let me take some time to explain these terms and suggest 3 ways that our church can shift into an intergenerational church. Before I do that, please know that I'm not trying to criticize our church or complain the things that I want to see. No, my intention and my sincere desire today is to invite all of us. That means all of us, from children to grandparents, to think with me, to look to the future about how we can best answer my earlier question, how can we prepare our church for the future? So let me explain these terms to you. A multi-generational church is where multiple generations coexist together. In a multi-generational church, generations coexist because of shared geography or family structures. Oftentimes, it's not because of a shared mission or meaningful relationships. And most of these churches and faith communities separate their ministries by age or generations. It is widely known, as you all know, that Sunday morning is the most segregated hour. But the same is true inside a multi-generational church. Why? Because every group has their own things going on. Families walk into the church together, but they don't even see each other until the time is over and it's time to go home. People tend to associate with a small circle of friends and cliques. So even among the same age group, there's lack of intentional relationship building. Of course, it may vary by church, but there is a lack of intentional interaction between generations. Then what is an intergenerational church? From the outside, it looks very similar, but it's very different in its vision and practice. An intergenerational church is more than just including kids and youth in worship gatherings for family worship. It is more intentional, it is more interactive. As generations pursue a shared mission and meaningful relationship. The prefix here, inter, implies what? Relationships. Relationships that are valued and cultivated among all generations. To encourage everyone, every single person, to have a sense of belonging and ownership, to call this church my church. As we read from the passages earlier, throughout the biblical tradition and the majority of history of the Israelites, communities of faith included people of all age groups together in corporate worship, in education, and in ministry. The church was not just multi-generational, but rather it was intergenerational. With the whole church together as one family and people of all ages learning from one another through doing life together. So with that, let me share 3 ways we can grow into an intergenerational church. First, an intergenerational church must worship together. Psalms 145, verses 3 to 7 says this: Lord, you are great. You're really worthy of praise. No one can completely understand how great you are. Parents praise your works to their children. They tell about your mighty acts. They speak about your glorious majesty. I will spend time thinking about your wonderful deeds. They speak about the powerful and wonderful things you do. I'll talk about the great things you have done, and they celebrate your great goodness. They sing for joy about your holy acts. I believe this passage is a beautiful description of an intergenerational community that worships together. The passing of truth and traditions is demonstrated through acts of worship. And that's what's happening here. As God's people moved from place to place throughout the Bible, God instructed them to do what? To build an altar to the Lord. And imagine this with me. Imagine that the children would not just sit around and do nothing, but they would observe, they will learn, and they will participate and become active participants in the whole process of worship. It wasn't just a job for the adults. The whole family sharing these experiences was crucial in preserving the promise of the covenant people of who we are. That's why I believe we need to create opportunities for the generations to worship together. Not just in the same room, but where we are learning and teaching, interacting, and actively contributing and participating in worship. And when we talk about worship, it doesn't have to be a formal service like this. It can be done in many different ways, including in your homes, in your cars, in other settings, and of course here at church. Every Sunday, I stand next to our youth students as we worship together. I love that the students take the front seats and are always eager to worship. And at times, some have been even on the stage leading worship with the adult team. A few weeks ago, I was so blessed. As I was worshiping, I saw a mother and daughter playing keyboard side by side. And I dream of a day when I get to do that with my kids. How amazing is that? The people from different ages can come together, worship the Lord in one voice. Once a month, the students join the EC service in sharing the communion together. We also celebrate Easter and Thanksgiving together as the whole congregation rejoices over young people or sometimes adults getting baptized. And I know we may not be their physical parents or their family, but they are our spiritual family. They are our spiritual children. Because we know that God brought us together as a spiritual family. And we see this happening in the children's ministry as well. I don't know how many of you actually see and know what's going on in the children's ministry. The older elementary school students help Pastor Esther lead worship for the preschool service. And starting this month, we have a plan where the youth worship team will start leading praise for the elementary service once a month. And these are just few examples, but we need to do more. We need to provide more opportunities, and I hope to see more intentional efforts to have generations worship together. Another way we can shift from multi-generation to intergenerational is by growing together. The Deuteronomy and the other Psalms passages that we read earlier emphasize the importance of telling, teaching, training, as we impart godly values and principles to the next generation. However, the impartation of wisdom and knowledge and experience does not have to be a one-way thing. It doesn't have to be a one-way exercise, because Bible calls us to inspire one another and grow together. The Apostle Paul says in Ephesians chapter 4 that God has appointed different people with unique gifts to serve and build up the church so that we can grow. And that we means all of us. That we can grow in every way to become the body of Christ. And oftentimes when we talk about growing, we automatically think we need to learn and become a student. And that's one way of growing, but more effective way of growing that I want to suggest is to take on a role of imparting, investing, and inspiring others. What do I mean by that? When you are responsible for teaching and leading others, you can't just show up to class. You won't. You will prepare, you will study, you get to know the people, and you'll pray. And I hope that's what we do as teachers. Every time I preach, every time I teach, guess what? I learn the most. And I feel like I grow the most from that experience. And this is also true in a non-class setting like mentorship or discipleship. Because Jesus showed us that true discipleship is doing life together and growing together in all aspects of life. It's not just passing head knowledge. And that's how we need to grow as an intergenerational church. And I heard a missionary say this about our church, that we are overeducated, overtrained, but underutilized. And I understand what he meant, because that's generally true in most churches, including ours. True growth happens when you put your knowledge and gifts into what? Practice. As we invest, as we inspire, as we impart our experiences to others. That's why I encourage you to serve as teachers. You know, when I saw earlier, and I'm kind of going off script here, 자막이 잠깐 없을 텐데요. When I saw we only had a handful of people stand up here, I said, we're in trouble. We have over 500 people, I would say, here. And if we have less than 20 people serving our children, our church is in big trouble. And I hope today God will speak to you the importance of your role and my role to invest in the next generation. I know many of us, we want to learn, we want to receive, and there's a season for that. However, as I said before, I believe most of us are overeducated, overtrained. And I believe the best way we can grow together as a church is to serve and to impart everything that we've learned to our next generation. We had same announcement go out every week. We're looking for assistants. We're looking for teachers. And it saddens me that we have to announce that every week. There's a lack of help. And I plead with the church that we will take this calling very seriously. You and I, of course we want to be comfortable. Of course, we want to just come and do the things that we want to do. But that's not why we come to church. Our children, our youth group, even our young adults, other ministries, they need you. They need you to be present with them, to teach them not only knowledge. So don't worry if you can't speak English. Don't worry if you're not a good teacher. It's the heart wanting to be there to guide our children. And let me explain a little bit in Korean. 제가 아까 우리 선생님들 기도할 때 사람들이 여기 일어났는데 너무 숫자가 없어서 깜짝 놀랐습니다. 우리 학생들이 몇 명인지 아세요? 우리 중고등부만 해도 70명, 우리 유치부, 초등부, 또 애기들까지 다 합치면 그것만 해도 100명이 넘습니다. 어떻게 20명 선생님들이 수많은 사람들을 가르치고 인도하겠습니까? 물론 교회 오고 교육받고 싶고 은혜 받고 싶고 다 이해하죠. 근데 우리가 정말 미래를 준비하는 교회라면 오늘 여러분들이 정말 심각하게 하나님 앞에 기도하고 내가 할 역할은 무엇인지, 영어를 못한다고요? 잘 못 가르치신다고요? 저는 그걸 그렇게 중요하다고 생각 안 합니다. 아이들을 사랑하고 아이들을 축복하고 싶은 마음이 있으면 그걸로 충분해요. And now going back, that's why I encourage you to serve as teachers, because it'll be a growing experience for you. Not because you get to teach, but because you get to learn a lot from our young ones, don't we? So if you desire to learn and grow, join the education ministry. I think Pastor Esther will be so happy that I said this. 우리 아마 에스더 전도사님이 여기 없지만 제가 이렇게 막 강조하는 거 알면 너무 기뻐할 거예요. But let us not go to 1 year and then exit. I really plead with you, church. We need people. We need people. And these are our children. So talk to me. Talk to Pastor Jason. Talk to Pastor Esther and see how you can get involved. There are many things that you can do. Not only this, but we also need to create opportunities for discussions, sharing, and fellowship where generations can learn from each other. And again, not necessarily in a classroom setting, but also in real life situations. And there's a term, as many of you might know, echo chamber, which refers to an environment in which a person encounters only beliefs or opinions that coincide with their own, so that their existing views are reinforced and alternative ideas are not considered. And if we're not careful, church can become an echo chamber. Our own generations can become our own echo chamber. That's why we need to talk to young people, because oftentimes the best way to get out of this echo chamber is to have an active engagement and build trust with other generations. One author said this: authentic listening and sharing allows for a balance of fun, laughter, play, along with freedom also to share in grief, sorrow, trauma, and pain. Including all age requires ingenuity and innovation. Isn't that a description of a true community? Where you share the joy and the pain together. Growing as an intergenerational church isn't about adding another program or putting an end to segregated ministries. It has to be more than that. It has to be integrated into a way of life. We need to foster an environment that values, equips, and includes all ages, where everyone has a seat and their voices are heard, no matter how old or how young they may be. Imagine with me how much you can grow as a church by listening to one another. Again, I didn't say by teaching one another. I say by listening to one another. And the last way we can shift from multi-generational church to an intergenerational church is by serving together. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 12, as I mentioned earlier, the Apostle Paul says that God appointed apostles, the prophets, pastors, and teachers to do what? To prepare God's people to serve, for service. I believe serving opportunities can foster lasting relationships built on shared experiences and values. And if you have experienced a missions trip with people from different generational group, you would know what I mean. I've led many missions teams where teens will become good buddies with elders, with deacons that they will never even say hi to at church. Again, it's about fostering an environment, being intentional. And the relationship that is built in that environment goes beyond that one trip or one ministry. And I know it's been a while since we had an intergenerational team, but I hope to see more and more in our church. I'll have the worship team come up. And since I've talked a lot about the importance of serving, let me wrap up the sermon by giving just a few examples within the church how intergenerational ministry is being cultivated, especially in our ministries in education and in our local outreach ministries. Every year, about 20 to 30 young adults serve as counselors for the youth retreats. Every year, the youth group students, more young adults or same young adults, and adults serve as VBS counselors and volunteers. It's such a blessing for me as a pastor, as a parent, to see different generations working together, serving together. And over the summer, we had our youth students serve as assistants in the nursery, in preschool, in elementary Sunday school classrooms. I believe through this experience, not only they were a blessing to the children loved them. But it was a great opportunity for the youth to learn to partner with adult teachers in the classrooms. Where else can they have that kind of experience? Every other Saturday, we have food distribution, where intergenerational ministry is being lived out as many parents bring their children to help bag the vegetables, fruit. Sometimes they just run around, but it's okay. That's all part of the experience. I see people from KCEC, Spanish ministry, even non-church members come and serve as we work together to serve the people who come to receive the food. And if you haven't been there, you're missing out big time. Again, how are we going to prepare the next generation? In what ways are we going to prepare the next generation? Aren't these the ways that we can do that? Oftentimes, you don't have to say anything because they watch. They watch how we serve. They learn how we treat others. And when they ask, just like the Israelites, their children ask, what's the meaning of this statue? God told them, tell them about what happened. If our children ask, why do we have to go to food distribution? Why do we have to serve? It's our job to tell them it's because it's our calling. It's our joy. It's our duty. It's our mission to serve and bless others. So if you haven't been there, if you have not been involved in education ministry or any other ministries, I really challenge you to start praying for that. Oftentimes, great revivals happen because people responded to a need. 교회 부흥이 꼭 저희가 같이 모여서 기도 모임만 하고 성경 공부만 하고 구역 예배하고 물론 다 중요하죠. 꼭 그렇게만 교회 부흥이 오는 것은 아닙니다. 한 사람이 하나님의 소명을 받고 그 소명을 실천하고 다른 사람들을 같이 사람들을 섬기고 그럴 때 부흥이 찾아옵니다. 그런 부흥이 저는 진짜 부흥이라고 생각합니다. Having service like this is good. It's not enough. It's good, not enough. And I don't want NCFC, our church, to settle for what's good enough. That's not our calling. Our God showed us that He gave His precious Son, His everything. Shouldn't we give our everything to the one who deserves everything? Let us all stand together. Before we sing this song, it is my prayer as your pastor that all of us will take a more intentional and interactive approach in everything that we do, so that we don't just coexist in the same place. That's not what families do. But we worship together, we grow, and we serve together as we strive to shift from a multi-generation church to an intergenerational church, so that we can effectively carry out our calling to prepare the church for the future. And that starts today. 제가 간절히 바라기는 오늘 저희가 그냥 예배 드리고 은혜 받고 그냥 나가는 것이 아니라 오늘부터 우리 교회가 Generational Church, Multi-Generational Church에서 Intergenerational Church, 세대 간의 교제가 있는 교회, 의도적인 교회, 전략적인 교회가 시작되었으면 좋겠습니다. I can't do this alone. 저 혼자 할 수 있는 일이 아닙니다. I need all of you to journey together with me. 우리가 다 같이 해야 되는 일입니다. 오늘 찬양할 때 The first verse goes like this. 1,000 generations come to worship God together. Isn't that wonderful? 이 찬양에 수많은 세대들이 모여서 하나님의 거룩하신 이름을 찬양한다고 합니다. 이 찬양 부르면서 정말 그런 날이 오기를, 우리 교회가 계속 세대들이 다 같이 모여서 하나님을 찬양하고 사회를 섬기고 같이 자라가는 교회가 되게 하려고 기도하는 마음으로 이 찬양 같이